Trent Dawson ruled the school until he messed with the wrong girl. What happened next? No one saw coming. It started with a look. Not the kind that passes unnoticed, but the kind that lingers, the kind that makes you feel like you don't belong. 16-year-old Jasmine Whitfield had been in Summit Ridge, Idaho for exactly 3 weeks, and she could already tell she was an outsider. She wasn't surprised. She and her father had moved around a lot because of his job, and she had long learned that some towns welcomed new faces, while others made sure you knew you weren't one of them. Summit Ridge High was the latter. Jasmine walked through the hallways, her backpack slung over one shoulder, avoiding the stairs. Her dad had warned her about kids like Trent Dawson, the ones who thought they owned the school, the town, and everyone in it. She had hoped, just maybe, she'd go unnoticed. That hope lasted 2 days. On the 3rd day, Trent made it clear she was his new target. It started with whispers when she passed by. Then his friends would laugh just loud enough for her to hear. After that came the jokes, mocking her hair, her voice, the way she walked. She ignored it. She had learned that was the safest thing to do, but Trent didn't like being ignored. One afternoon, Jasmine sat in English class scribbling notes as Mr. Holloway droned on about The Great Gatsby. A sharp whisper cut through the room. "Hey, new girl." She didn't look up. "I'm talking to you, Whitfield." Still, she kept her eyes on her notebook, tightening her grip on her pen. Trent smirked, leaning back in his chair. "I just think it's funny, how some people show up where they're not wanted." A few snickers. Jasmine forced herself to keep writing. "But hey," Trent continued, voice dripping with fake sympathy, "maybe you're just lost. I mean, a school like this with people like us must feel kind of different, huh?" Jasmine's chest tightened, but she said nothing. She had promised herself she wouldn't let people like him get to her. But Trent wasn't done. He leaned closer. "Hey, Whitfield. You hear me? Or is it hard to hear over all that—" "Trent?" Mr. Holloway's voice cut in, sharp and impatient. "Do you have something to share with the class?" Trent leaned back, hands up in mocked surrender. "No, sir. Just welcoming the new student." Mr. Holloway gave him a warning look, then turned back to the board. Trent shot Jasmine one last smirk before settling in his seat. She let out a quiet breath. Maybe that was it. Maybe he'd get bored. Maybe— A folded piece of paper landed on her desk. Her fingers hesitated before opening it. "Go back to where you came from." Jasmine's stomach dropped. She didn't react. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction. She folded the paper and tucked it into her backpack, keeping her face blank as the lesson continued. But things were only getting started, because Trent Dawson didn't know who her father was. And soon, he was going to find out. But before that, things were about to get a whole lot worse. Jasmine had learned to endure things like this. She'd lived in enough towns, walked through enough hallways, sat in enough classrooms to know people like Trent always existed. But the thing about bullies, if you don't react, they just push harder. It was a Friday and the cafeteria was loud. Trays clattering, voices bouncing off the walls, the sharp scent of pizza and stale fries lingering in the air. Jasmine sat alone at a corner table, earbuds in, pretending she couldn't hear the whispers around her. Then she felt it. That presence. She looked up. Trent stood a few feet away, his hands stuffed in his Letterman jacket, his trademark smirk plastered across his face. Behind him, his friends, Liam, Kyle, and Chase, stood watching, waiting. She had seen this before. Trent tilted his head. "You always eat alone?" Jasmine didn't answer. "You should really try to make some friends." He looked at her untouched tray, then at his friends. Or maybe people just don't want to sit with you. Kyle snickered. Liam leaned in. I think she likes being a loner. Trent took a step closer. Or maybe she just doesn't belong here. Jasmine's fingers curled under the table. She didn't say anything, didn't move. Trent didn't like that. In one quick motion, he grabbed her tray and flipped it. The loud clatter of the plastic tray hitting the floor sent the whole cafeteria into silence. Food splattered across the tile, mashed potatoes smeared across her sneakers, milk spreading in a white pool. Gasps, stifled laughter. Jasmine's hands clenched into fists. Trent's smirk widened. Oops? Jasmine stared at the mess, heat creeping up her neck. She felt everyone's eyes on her, waiting. Would she cry? Would she lash out? Would she... She pushed her chair back slowly, calmly. She reached for a napkin, wiped her hands, and stood up. She wasn't going to give him what he wanted. But Trent wasn't done. As she turned to leave, he moved in front of her, blocking her path. Hey, where you going? We're just getting to know each other. Jasmine took a slow breath. Move. The cafeteria held its breath. Trent's smirk flickered, just for a second. What was that? He asked, voice laced with amusement. She held his eyes. I said, move. His friends laughed. Whoa, Liam chuckled. She's got a mouth. Trent stepped closer, closing the space between them. Or what? Jasmine swallowed. She could feel her pulse in her ears. Her fingers twitched at her sides. And then, what the hell is going on here? A sharp voice cut through the cafeteria. Miss Reese, the assistant principal, strode toward them, her heels clicking against the tile. Her eyes darted between Jasmine and Trent, then down at the spilled food. Trent's smirk was gone. He took a step back, putting on an innocent face. Nothing, Miss Reese. Just a little accident. Miss Reese didn't look convinced. Her gaze flicked to Jasmine. Is that true? Jasmine hesitated. If she told the truth, nothing would change. Kids like Trent never got in trouble. She had seen this play out before. She glanced around. No one spoke up. No one defended her. She swallowed back the lump in her throat. Yeah, she muttered. It was an accident. Trent smiled. Miss Reese exhaled. All right, get this cleaned up. And just like that, it was over. Trent's friends snickered as they walked away, bumping shoulders. See you Monday, Whitfield, Trent called over his shoulder. Jasmine stood there, staring at the mess on the floor. She thought about her dad, about how he always told her to stand up for herself. But what was the point when no one listened? She grabbed her backpack and walked out of the cafeteria. But this time she wasn't just going to let it slide. The house was quiet when Jasmine got home. Too quiet. She dropped her backpack by the front door and slipped off her shoes, still speckled with mashed potatoes from lunch. She didn't even want to look at them. Jasmine, that you? Her father's voice came from the kitchen. Elliot Whitfield wasn't the kind of man who missed details. As the newly appointed police chief of Summit Ridge, he had spent years reading people, picking up on things most wouldn't notice. Jasmine hesitated before answering. Yeah, it's me. She walked into the kitchen where he was leaning against the counter, still in his uniform, a fresh cup of coffee in hand. His short-cropped hair was graying at the temples, his sharp brown eyes scanning her face before she could even sit down. You okay? He asked. She forced a shrug. Yeah. Chief Whitfield took a slow sip of his coffee, still watching her. How was school? Jasmine slid into a chair at the table, running her fingers along a scratch in the wood. Fine. A pause. Then he set his coffee down. Try again. She exhaled. She should have known she could never hide things from him. But part of her didn't even want to talk about it. What was the point? Nothing would change. Elliot folded his arms. Jasmine. She stared at the table, her voice quieter than she wanted it to be. Some kid dumped my lunch on me today. The words sat in the air between them. Her father didn't react right away. He was too controlled for that. But his eyes darkened just slightly, his jaw tightening. Who? Jasmine hesitated. She didn't want to give him the name. She didn't want him to march down to the school and make things worse. She had learned, time and time again, that calling out people like Trent Dawson only made them push harder. It doesn't matter, she muttered. Her father's voice was quiet but firm. It does. She sighed, rubbing her hands together. Trent Dawson. Something flickered in his expression. Recognition. Jasmine furrowed her brow. You know him? Her father was silent for a moment, then he exhaled through his nose. I know his family. Jasmine scoffed. Of course you do. Elliot's fingers drummed against the counter. And the school? What did they do? She hesitated before answering. Nothing. That did it. His eyes sharpened. Nothing. She shook her head. Miss Reese showed up, asked if it was an accident. I said yes. Elliot frowned. Why? Jasmine met his gaze, frustration bubbling up. Because if I said the truth, nothing would have happened. You think they'd actually punish Trent Dawson? His dad's probably on the school board or something. Her father leaned forward, arms still crossed. And what message does that send? She blinked. What? When someone does something wrong, he said, his voice steady, and we let it slide. What message does that send? To them? To you? Jasmine didn't have an answer. He sighed, shaking his head. Jasmine, I get it. You don't want to make a scene. But letting things like this go, that's how people like him keep getting away with it. She clenched her jaw, looking away. I don't want to make it worse. Elliot was quiet for a long time. Then he walked over, resting a hand on her shoulder. You don't have to fight this alone. Jasmine swallowed the lump in her throat. She wanted to believe him, but she wasn't sure things could change. What she didn't know was that her father wasn't just going to let this slide. And tomorrow, Trent Dawson was going to learn exactly who he had messed with. Monday morning felt different. Jasmine could tell the second she stepped out of her dad's car. There was a shift in the air, a ripple of whispers in the hallways. People were looking at her, not with the usual sneers or smirks, but with something else. Curiosity, unease. Something had changed. She barely made it to her locker before she got her answer. Dude, the police chief is here. Jasmine's stomach dropped. She turned toward the main office, and sure enough, there he was, Chief Elliot Whitfield. Standing tall in his uniform, his police badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights. His presence commanded attention even from the teachers. Jasmine's pulse quickened. Oh my God, she muttered under her breath. Before she could even process what was happening, the office door swung open. Chief Whitfield, I really don't see why this had to be taken so far. Jasmine froze. The voice belonged to Principal Warren, a middle-aged man with a thinning hairline and a forced smile. Behind him stood Miss Reese and Trent Dawson's parents. Jasmine's breath hitched. Darren and Lauren Dawson looked exactly how she expected. Darren, a tall, broad-shouldered man in an expensive suit, had the look of someone who wasn't used to being questioned. Lauren, dressed in a beige cashmere sweater, clutched her designer purse like it was a shield. And then there was Trent. He stood beside them, his usual smirk replaced with something new. Confusion. Like he didn't quite understand how things had gotten to this point. Chief Whitfield didn't look at him. His gaze was locked on Principal Warren. I took it this far, Elliot said, his voice calm but firm, because my daughter was publicly humiliated in your cafeteria, and your staff let it happen. Miss Reese cleared her throat. With all due respect, Chief, No. Elliot cut her off. No excuses. You saw what happened, and you let her take the blame for it. Trent Dawson let out a short laugh, shaking his head. Chief, come on. They're kids. It was just a misunderstanding. Elliot finally turned to him. A misunderstanding. His voice didn't rise, but somehow it felt sharper, more dangerous. Your son targeted my daughter, bullied her, humiliated her in front of the entire school. Lauren gave an exasperated sigh. Chief Whitfield, do you know how many times we get calls from the school over silly little things like this? Boys will be boys. Jasmine clenched her fists. Elliot didn't even blink. That's the problem, he said. People like you raise boys like him, and then you wonder why they grow up thinking they can get away with anything. Trent shifted uncomfortably. For the first time, he looked small. Principal Warren forced another smile. Let's not escalate this. Maybe we can come to an agreement. No. Elliot's voice was steel. There's no agreement, there's accountability. A tense silence filled the office. Jasmine swallowed. She had never seen her father like this, not as just her dad, but as Chief Whitfield. Lauren glanced at her son, then sighed dramatically. Trent, apologize. Trent's jaw clenched. Mom! Now! Trent let out a slow breath, turning to Jasmine. His usual arrogance was gone, replaced with something else. Humiliation. Sorry, he muttered. Elliot raised an eyebrow. Louder! Trent's ears burned red. He gritted his teeth. I'm sorry, he said, barely looking at her. Jasmine knew it wasn't genuine. She knew it didn't mean anything. But for once, he wasn't the one in control. Elliot turned back to Principal Warren. This isn't over, he said. I want a full report filed, and if this school has any history of letting things like this slide, trust me, I'll find it. Trent Dawson's face hardened. You don't want to make an enemy out of the wrong people, Chief. Elliot turned to him, eyes steady. Neither do you. And with that, he walked out. But this was only the beginning. By lunch, the whole school was talking about what had happened in the office. Whispers followed Jasmine down the hallways. Some kids avoided looking at her, others stared. A few even gave her something she hadn't expected, nods of quiet approval. Trent, on the other hand, wasn't taking it well. She saw it in the way he stormed into the cafeteria. Jaw tight, hands clenched into fists. His usual arrogance had been replaced with something uglier. Anger, humiliation, frustration. Jasmine knew guys like him. They didn't like feeling powerless. And Trent Dawson wasn't about to let himself look weak in front of everyone. So when she walked past him to grab a tray, he muttered, just loud enough for her to hear, Guess Daddy had to fight your battles for you, huh? Jasmine froze. The cafeteria noise faded into the background. She turned slowly, meeting his glare. What did you just say? Trent took a step closer, a mocking sneer curling at his lips. You heard me? His voice was low, sharp. You think this makes you special? That people actually care about you? The second your dad gets transferred or fired or whatever, you're back to being nothing. Jasmine's pulse pounded. But this time she wasn't just going to walk away. She squared her shoulders, lifted her chin. You're mad, she said simply. Trent blinked, caught off guard. What? She tilted her head. You thought you'd get away with it, huh? Just like always. But for once, someone actually put you in your place. His sneer faltered. Jasmine took a step forward, closing the space between them. That's why you're mad, she continued. Because you know that no matter what you say, no matter how much you try to act tough, everyone saw what happened today. She leaned in just slightly. And now they don't respect you. They pity you. Trent's face turned red. Shut up, she smiled. Make me. For the first time, he was the one backing down. He clenched his jaw, fists shaking at his sides. But he didn't say another word. Instead, he turned and stormed out of the cafeteria, pushing past his friends. Jasmine exhaled, the adrenaline still pumping through her veins. She could feel the eyes on her, but for the first time since she moved here, she didn't feel small. She didn't feel like the outsider. She felt seen. And as she picked up her tray and walked to her table, she realized something else. Trent Dawson might have thought he ruled this school, but that was over now. And he knew it. By the end of the day, it was clear things had changed. Jasmine felt it in the way people looked at her. Not with pity, not with judgment, but with something else. Respect. Some students still whispered, still stared, but they weren't laughing anymore. The ones who had once snickered at Trent's jokes now acted like they didn't even know him. And Trent? He kept his head down. Jasmine didn't need an apology. She didn't need him to admit he was wrong. Because the truth was, he had already lost. The moment her father walked into that office, the moment the school had been forced to confront the truth, Trent's power had been taken from him. And without that, he was just another kid. At the end of the day, Jasmine climbed into her dad's car, shutting the door behind her. Elliot glanced at her. How was school? She hesitated, then, for the first time in weeks, she smiled. Not bad. Her father smirked, pulling out of the parking lot. See? I told you. People like Trent, they only have power if you give it to them. Jasmine exhaled, looking out the window. Yeah, I get that now. A comfortable silence filled the car as they drove through town. Then Elliot spoke again. You know, I didn't stand up for you because I thought you were weak. She frowned. What? He kept his eyes on the road. I did it because I knew you weren't. Jasmine blinked. Elliot glanced at her, a small smile tugging at his lips. I just needed you to see it for yourself. Jasmine swallowed the lump in her throat, looking down at her hands. For so long, she had felt powerless, like the only way to survive was to shrink, to disappear. But today she realized something important. Standing up for yourself isn't just about fighting back, it's about knowing your worth. And once you know that, no one can take it away from you. How many times do people like Trent get away with things because no one speaks up? Because people assume it won't change anything. Bullies thrive in silence. They count on it. But the second you take away their control, the second you refuse to be afraid, they lose their power. So don't let anyone tell you who you are. Don't let them define your worth. Because the moment you decide to stand tall, they can't push you down. And they never will.